Australia. I thought I would bring this up because Australia is dead. May they rest in peace. And I thought I would read the obituary today. The dream that was Australia and any semblance of freedom of speech and any semblance of digital privacy is long gone. So the Australian government, they just passed legislation that hands extraordinary new hacking powers to Australian authorities. And what does that mean? It basically means that the Australian Federal Police, the Australian Criminal Intelligence Commission, will now be able to access the computers and networks of those suspected of conducting criminal activity online and take over their online accounts covertly under the Identify and Disrupt bill, which was just passed. And if you dig into how this was passed, I mean, it's so infuriating because you have all of these people, suggesting amendments. You have these committees that are suggesting amendments, say, how do we not completely destroy privacy on the internet? And what do? Well, they kind of rejected a bunch of the National Security Committee's suggestions. So the Security Committee called for a higher threshold in issuing the warrants in terms of the crimes they could be applied for. So they said, let's actually just apply these to serious crimes, right? And so they rejected that. They rejected the ability for warrants to only be approved by a judge. They were like, nah, let's just make it really easy for the government to take over these things and not have a judge involved. So it's a really sad situation. As we know, Australia sort of sets the precedent in the Five Eyes. A lot of policies are tested out there that are then, tried out in the US. Australia banned end-to-end encryption. They have fines now for like multi-million-dollar fines for companies that don't add backdoors and don't give the Australian government access when the Australian government demands it. When they released that, then the White House started to really press down on its rhetoric around that as well, introduced a bunch of bills like the Lawful Access to Encrypted Data Act, the Earn It bill, all of that. It's a very scary situation, for digital privacy. It affects the crypto space as well because the government, if they have access to people's back end of any tech that they're using, which is basically what they've demanded and have passed through this, how does that affect your ability to have sovereignty over your money? Like are wallet companies, if they want to exist in Australia, going to have to put in backdoors and all of these things? Like it gets very complicated, but just from a privacy standpoint, it's atrocious. There is no privacy on the internet in Australia, whereas America has this semblance of, we kind of don't spy, and yeah, sure, we get all of the data from the UK and from Australia and New Zealand in this roundabout way. They do all the collection for us, so we have privacy. The Australian government is just outright saying you have no privacy on the internet. We inspect everything. We have the ability to change data on your computer, in your accounts, all of that. So very scary stuff. But Jen, did I see your hand go up there?
Ben had his hand up first, so I'll go after.
I mean, shouts to Australia. It's just like the sandbox of like digital infringement in a lot of different ways. Yeah. We saw them like ban Facebook news, then unban Facebook news, ban and encryption. Like they're just really shooting from the hip. It feels like a little bit over there. I think, my immediate thought on this is like, this kind of prioritizes in a lot of ways the different needs for things like mesh networks, right? For like mixed nets, like other things like that, because like underlying all of this is ISPs, like internet service providers, like the telecoms industries of the world that are highly centralized. There's only a few of them, at least in the US in particular. I can't speak to Australia, but like provide the digital gateways to even access the internet in and of itself. And those are kind of by and large the bodies through which, not even individual companies like giving over access accounts, but, in terms of the NSA and others, like really plugging into those entities are the ones that give, the government access to all of these access points. So, I think that getting away from those may be one way to try and fight this. But again, this is really discouraging. I think that, again, we talk about what amounts to criminality and the sliding scope of that. I mean, when you talk about like predictive policing in the US, when you talk about like, recidivism rates and how algorithms are meant to sort of predict those things and influence judicial decisions, this is just like hugely problematic on so a lot of ways and raises more questions than it does answers. But certainly, account takeovers are going to happen, and it's very concerning to see.
Yeah.
Yeah, Naomi, I was just going to add, you didn't mention that the bill was passed in, I think, just about 24 hours amongst all of those rejections happening. And you said that, the amendment to make this for only serious crimes was rejected. But I have a quote here from Home Affairs Minister Karen Andrews. She said, under our changes, the AFP will have more tools to pursue organized crime gangs, keep drugs off our streets and out of our community, and those who commit the most heinous crimes against children. And it's just so frustrating to see government after government use this narrative to implement these laws that put regular law-abiding citizens at risk. It's just, it's very, very, very frustrating.
Yeah, it's those charged terms that pull at the heartstrings. I mean, there's another quote here that says, it's obviously much easier to justify the introduction of such powers by focusing on the most serious types of crimes. No one would argue with that in respect to crimes like child abuse and exploitation and terrorism. But it's important that we engage in a more difficult task of justifying the introduction of extraordinary powers by reference to how the powers could actually be used. And that's the rhetoric that's always missing when we have these vast-reaching surveillance laws that are introduced. They don't talk about the implications of how they'll actually be used. They just say, well, we could use this to fight this very, very dangerous thing. And it's not talking about, well, this is going to infringe on the privacy rights of everyone. This is probably going to be exploited and taken advantage of and used for other nefarious things.